Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. My name is Alessandra Alonso. I'm the Managing Director and Founder of Women in Travel, and also the founder of the International Women in Travel and Tourism Forum that takes place in its second edition digitally this year. I am delighted to be with all of you today. There are many of you joining us. There's over 300 people registered for the week, and you are everywhere in the world, from Brazil to Boston, from South Africa to China to Vietnam, and here in the UK and in Europe. We are delighted to have you with us. And we are very, very grateful that you are taking the time to be with us today and this week, because we know that the situation is still difficult for everyone, for industry, for many countries. And so we truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to join us for this very important debate. So we are going to have a very, very busy week this week, and as you know, nothing will have happened unless a whole team of people behind and with myself were there to support and to cheer us on. So I want to thank first and foremost our partners and sponsors. You see them here behind me on the banners. I want to thank the hard-working team at Women in Travel CIC, because they put all the hours under the sun on this event. And I want to thank you and everyone, all the women, all the men, all the individuals, the community and the groups who have supported us and have encouraged us to have this important event and this important discussion for this week. Now, I am not here to talk for very long. In fact, I really want to, without further ado, introduce my conference chair and my, as I call her, #1 cheerleader, Zina Bencek. She is the Managing Director EMEA for Intrepid Travel. She was with us last year in Iceland when we first launched the event, and she's here today. So without further ado, I pass you on to Zina, and thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. Warm welcome to everyone to today's forum. I'm so pleased that we are able to hold this event in such a challenging year for our industry. The idea for a forum about gender equality and diversity was actually born a couple of years ago at the end of a panel that I shared with Alessandra at the World Travel Market. It was my first public speaking opportunity, and I'm very grateful for her for giving me that opportunity. The discussion we had this day made us feel that we needed a place where all individuals could meet to share their experience and learn from each other. And most importantly, walk away with actions that they could implement in their own businesses. We had the first International Women in Travel and Tourism Forum in Iceland last year. And what made it particularly special was that we had the chance to bring the younger generation of leaders to join us. And we could see the impact we had on them. And I'd like to start by sharing a quote from our customer service manager at Intrepid Travel here in the UK, who said to me the other day about this forum, that the International Women in Travel Forum and Tourism Forum in Reykjavik last year was one of the most inspiring days of her life. It completely opened her eyes to what gender equality actually means, rather than just being a concept that she liked the sound of. She's proud to be part of a company that's building a more inclusive future. And that is exactly why we're so happy at Intrepid to be supporting this event since the very beginning. So before we look at what's coming up this week, I would like us to think about the context. A recent report by the World Economic Forum has shown that the pandemic set us decades backwards in terms of gender equality. COVID had a profound and disproportionate impact on women around the world. Women faced job losses, an increase in violence, and lost precious access to education, especially in some part of the world. I've seen myself what the opportunity to work in travel means for women and what happens when it's taken away. In my previous role, running Intrepid Operation Office in Morocco, I campaigned to give more women the chance to have a career as tour guides, as well as supported women to work as suppliers for our business and encouraged women to take on management roles. It wasn't only about empowering women for the sake of it, but it makes business sense. And it's part of the reason why our Morocco office has become the first travel certified B Corp of the country, as well as one of the most successful destination management companies. We were able to attract the best talent and elevate our profile. And I'm very proud that I left the business under very good, capable women hands, and our management team, as I left, was made of 83% of women. For many of these women in Morocco working in travel, has given them an independent income for the first time. For example, Bia, a divorced, illiterate Berber woman, earned money for the first time of her life by hosting intrepid travelers in her place. Hafida, the first female mountain guide of the country, was able to support her son to get education in France. And those are just some examples from home. Closer to my new home, here in the UK, women in the Western world have also been more likely than men to be made redundant. They have carried a greater share of housework and childcare than men, leading to high stress level and even depression. But there are also many uplifting stories of women innovating and even launching new businesses during COVID. And I would love to talk about this example. Education for All, a British Moroccan charity that helps girls access education, has been forced to adapt to remote working as the world was getting into lockdown. So in order to ensure young girls from rural areas of the country, in order to ensure for these young girls to study online, they've successfully fundraised and connected the girls through internet using tablets and smartphones. Later, we will hear from one of our speakers, Lola Akinnet, a travel writer and photographer who launched during the pandemic a new virtual shopping experience called Local Purse. The aim of Local Purse is to connect customers with local artisans and guides. This gave local people a new way to earn money while travel was off the table. And finally, at Intrepid, we worked with women in travel to give 3 amazing ladies the chance to start a new career. All 3 are immigrants to the UK who have overcome real challenges in their lives. They're now about to begin hosting tours in London, and you'll have the chance for a preview of one of them this week. We'll talk about it later. During the pandemic, we've also seen some amazing female leadership in travel. And just a couple of great examples of that are Julia Lobu Said of Advantage Travel Partnership, as well as Kate Nichols-Obi of UK Hospitality, who have been tireless standing up for the industry during the pandemic. All these women and others like them have shown resilience and innovation that our industry will be poorer without. We can't let gender equality in travel become another casualty of coronavirus. Empowering women in travel at all levels is essential to the responsible recovery. Investing in women drives growth, innovation, and creates a fairer and happier world. And it is scientifically proven that it's good for the environment. That is why it is so important that we are here today. So, what can we expect for the next 5 days? This year, as well as the keynotes, the panels, and the mentoring, we are bringing you some new features. For example, the Talks for Travel. We invited you to submit innovative, brilliant ideas, case studies, or projects to accelerate gender empowerment, diversity, and inclusion in the travel and tourism industry. We've had some fantastic responses, and we're excited to share them with you a bit later this week. And I'm also pleased to say that for the first time, we will be running a male allyship event where many CEOs, company CEOs, signed up to talk about how they can enact real change. And we know without men's help, we won't go anywhere. In addition, an exciting virtual social program is lined up for Saturday, including a virtual Ethiopian cooking class. I've had a preview of this one last week, and it's really fantastic. Aside from that, I can also promise a lot of interesting debates, useful, practical ideas that you can take away and implement in your own business. That only leads me to introduce the first session. Laura Storm is an expert in regenerative leadership and a World Economic Forum Young Leader. She has spent her entire life, her entire career advising global leaders on sustainability and building purpose-driven organizations. I can't wait to hear more. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. Really looking forward to attend this conference today. It is my donkey here on the farm. Yeah, now. Can you give me a yes, just so I know?
Hey Laura, if you just switch to the slides, we can just see
there?
Stage. So if you just switch across to the
just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So what I would like to take you through in the next little hour, we also have
sorry to interrupt, Laura. We can't see the slides at the moment. We can just see the stage. So if you just switch the view to the slides, if that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
The slides now?
Yep, all set to go.
Perfect. Wonderful. So what you heard in the background was permaculture farm, and she actually just gave birth last week, so that's very exciting. And it's the dad that is sometimes yonking in the background because they're separated right now and he misses them greatly. So what I will talk you through is the concept of leadership. I've co-authored a book that we published a couple all over the world, and how can they transform to regeneration. But let's start with a definition. What does it actually mean to talk about regenerative development? So that will be the first part of the little talk. So we all shared with the same kind of understanding of what regenerative means and to what extent it really to replenish, revitalize, to heal. And why is that needed now more than ever? So we are in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. We have runaway climate change. We lose up to 1,000 species a day. We soon have more plastic in our oceans than marine life. I could go on. Been through is what scientists refer to as the Great Acceleration. Since the 1950s, everything from urban population to use of fertilizer to paper production have just accelerated like crazy. And this has taken a huge toll on our. So this is not the only area that has accelerated for the past decades. It's also our inner health and well-being. And I believe that those two things go together. Stress and mental illness have accelerated like crazy in the past couple of decades. Many executives. The reason why this is incredibly important when we talk about leadership is the fact that everything is interconnected. When we are very stressed, we go into this brainwave mode of high beta. And when we are in high beta, we can simply not access compassion. We cannot access our systems. We see the world with tunnel vision, and we have very little consideration for the people and the ecosystem that upon which our lives depend. So I believe that's an incredibly important component for us as leaders coming up with solutions. World in a more sustainable, regenerative trajectory. Even more important now as we are navigating in the midst of a global pandemic. And we need to think creatively. We need to think out of the box. We need to dare reply radical new thinking. We cannot make the mistakes of the past. Mindset. So this is the approach that we often have to solving problems. We think that a global political framework or a new financial mechanism or help program or a new technology that we can just transfer and scale will solve our problems. But I think interconnected, regenerative approach. We need to bear in mind that we are human beings, and how can we replenish and nourish our ecosystems, both our inner ecosystems and the ecosystems upon which our lives on this planet depend. Fitting in the 20th century is now completely outdated, and we need that radical new thinking. And that's why I really celebrate you coming together this week, because you need more than ever to reinvent new ways of steering this industry forward in a regenerative direction. And we need urgently new models to assess the problems that we are facing. We cannot apply the same thinking to our current solutions or current challenges. And that's why I hope and think that the regenerative approach could offer a new strategy and a new take forward. The approach of viewing everything as a rigid mechanistic machine that you have to make as efficient as possible with little regard for inner and outer ecosystems. That is a mindset of the past. That is a mindset that we need to leave behind. It's a connected, holistic framework, and it's borrowing insights and wisdom from 100 different fields. On the screen, you can see a few of them that we are tapping into in our frameworks and in the models that my co-author Giles Hutchins and I have co-created based on and lending on other people's great ideas. So a regenerative process moves beyond sustainability. Do we really want to sustain what we have right now? My answer to that question is no. I think we need a regenerative healing approach of our society in order for us to embark on a more healthy regenerative path going forward. We need to think as regenerators instead of extractors. So those generations that have come before us have very much had extract as much as possible. How can I reap fruits without thinking of sowing new seeds? And that is the mindset that we need to change. So in its essence, this is the exciting shift that we are embarking upon in the coming decade. This is the kind of transformation that we want to stick around as a species. And I'm not kind of deliberately trying to be very dramatic, but this is the question our generation is faced with. We need to radically redesign our model on Earth, on our model on spaceship Earth, right? So years of regenerative thinking from those organizations out there blazing new trails. And that's the essence of what our book is about. We have been exploring the field of what is the regenerative pioneers doing differently, and could we put that on some kind that these regenerative pioneers are tapping into 3.8 billion years of experience. They are tapping into the logic of life. And they are designing their products and service, their culture, their everything based on the logic of life, the key principles of nature. I'd like to briefly take you through the 7 key principles of the logic of life, because hopefully they can offer inspiration for you as you dive into exciting discussions in this week coming up. So the first principle is that life in its essence, life affirming principles. And what does that mean? It means that when an apple falls to the ground, that's not waste. That is delicious nutrients for the topsoil. It's delicious food for trillions of microbes. The next batch of innovation, of production, that can then come in the spring. So how can we think like that? How can we think in ways where our actions doesn't create waste, but create nutrients for other products and services, for other people to use? Design our models based on a circular economy or cradle-to-cradle concepts, which is thankfully gaining more and more traction and interest, and more companies are applying a circular economy to their production. One of the kind of shining stars in that field was a traditional company in the 90s. The founder, Ray Anderson, in his legacy, he said, "I want to be a truly regenerative company." And next year, they are ready to launch all of their facilities and offices to be forest. So their factories turn sunlight into energy. They purify water. They only use regenerative materials. They make sure that their waste can be used somewhere else, either for them or somewhere else in the greater ecosystem. They also take it very seriously, which means that they have a responsibility to make sure that all of their actions is creating regenerative ripple effects. So for example, they are paying fishermen on the Philippines to fish up discarded fishing nets, plastic fishing nets from the oceans. And they use that plastic in their production. At the end of the product life cycle, those carpet tiles that the fishing nets have helped produce are then returned to the factory and used in other carpet tiles. So we need to think in a closed loop. That's the first key principle. It doesn't just go for viewing products as us having to transform to more life regenerating, life affirming actions. It's also about our company cultures. How can we move from those cultures that is sapping our energy, that has so much toxicity, a vibrant culture full of health and vitality? That's a key focus area for a regenerative leader, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. The second principle is that everything in nature is constantly changing, and we need to accept that and learn to flow with holding on. So Darwin has been misinterpreted. Many use Darwin to say survival of the fittest, as in it's the strongest, most loudest, most dominating, often alpha male that wins in life, that becomes a success. He never said that. Those species best able to fit in and adapt quickly. And those species that are best able to adapt quickly are those that are collaborating. And that's a huge difference for our mindset and how his legacy has been misinterpreted. Collaborate and quickly adapt. We can learn a lot from superorganisms in nature, for example. A beehive or an anthill, a flock of birds, a school of fish, they all have a very clear purpose. They are amazing at constantly sensing and responding. Is there a threat? Is there a new? Very clear feedback loops, communication loops in terms of what needs to happen in XYZ situation. But then there's a lot of ability for the individual to do what that individual desires to do. There's a lot of self-organizing happening constantly. And that means that flooding, an anthill is able to relocate and save its queen and save its eggs within 30 minutes. How can we learn from that? How can we learn from that and dare move away from rigid, bureaucratic, stagnant hierarchy? So much innovation is sapping the whole, the living system, from energy and potential and innovation. How can we dare move away from the rigid mechanistic hierarchies and more into viewing our organizations, our communities as vibrant living systems? principle is that life is relational and interconnected. This is how the Austrian physicist Fritjof Capra is visualizing the difference between death and life. And I think that visual quite clearly communicates that life are vibrant relationships within the system. So the degree to which a living system is thriving depends on the quality of the interconnected relationships. So again, life did not take over the world by combat, but by networking. And so this is just 3 examples of a million wonderful and amazing partnerships and relationships in nature. We have the wonderful mycelium underground, which is seen as a living organism in itself. In Oregon, there is a mycelium network on that is attaching to the roots of the trees, and means that it can transport water and nutrients and sugar from one part of the forest. And if the trees in another part of the forest that is really lacking those nutrients send signals to its friends, they will then through the mycelium network to the parts of the forest that feels depleted. Imagine if we work like that in society and in our organizations. The pollinators are doing wonders by constantly making sure that they are cross-pollinating, and through their actions are creating new life, new fruits, new vegetables. We also have symbiotic relationship between the clover and the crocodile is one example, where the bird is cleaning the teeth of the crocodile in return for that delicious meat between the teeth. So that's just a few examples of relationships in nature, but it represents the mindset that we get. Having rigid KPIs that is undermining the vitality and health of the organization. Because imagine if the KPIs of the heart undermine those of the lungs, or if the kidneys' actions directly cross the abilities for the spleen to thrive, we would have a body that would collapse, that would be sick. And we can transfer that if we are not nourishing interconnected relationships and partnerships and collaboration, our living system will inevitably collapse. And it has a lot of toxicity that is straining the organization from health and vitality. We need this whole system perspective for our organizations and our societies to thrive. And how can we learn from that, again, when we view our organizations with this regenerative lens? So our organizations are also the living systems, the communities, the entities that need to be able to withstand systemic shocks. Strong ability of carrying the organization through what we call the carrying capacity of the whole. And if your interconnected relationship is not thriving, your carrying capacity for you to be able to withstand any kind of storm will be very poor. So as leaders, we need to keep that in mind. How can we constantly strengthening the health and vitality of our system by also focusing on the quality of the interconnected relationship and the degree of diversity? That is at the top of your list of priorities, because that is the key to how nature thrives. Nature banks on diversity, thrives thanks to diversity. So we cannot continue this monocultural approach to life, because it is the degree of diversity that determines the overall. Just one example borrowed from permaculture. So permaculture farmers, they work a lot with the concept of edge effects. How can I create an edge effect between two cultures? When two cultures are colliding, that's where I have the most vibrancy in example, the meeting of land and water, or forest and grassland, but also different kinds of species. That's what will attract the most pollinators. That is what creates the most vibrant degree in your out on your fields, in your garden. And we can transfer that concept to our organization. From a lot of research and study carried out, that we are still lagging behind on diversity, but the fact that diversity matters is thankfully getting on more and more executives' radar. It is what makes a system thrive, that we have diverse, but also age and belief systems, and how can we be aware of that so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, where leaders are continuously hiring people that reminds them a bit of themselves because it feels safe. We need, as leaders, to dare go out of teams, or when we are exploring with partners in our network, something I will get back to later. So traveling offers unique opportunities for being these facilitators of cross-pollination. And how can you have this mindset in terms of world, that you are facilitating and aiding and nurturing really potent cross-pollination to happen in the real world, because we need that more than ever. Society needs to engage and include more edge effect. As a potential there, because of course you need to radically reinvent your role, purpose and mission, but that's one of many areas that I would focus on. The fifth principle is the fact that everything in life is cyclical and rhythmical, that for life to thrive, summer, the winter, the night and the day. But we have been trained, many of us, and back in the days, I also studied at business school, and we were never taught the importance of a process of integration and learning. We were taught that we had to be constantly productive, that when we had launched a product or a process on a Friday, Monday, and continue going forward. And that is the culture in many organizations today, that it's seen as weak to allow for stillness, reflection, integration. But that is what any ecosystem, including our own, needs to be able to function. We need that spring and summer, yes, but we also need the autumn and the winter. And as leaders, we have to be able to not shy away from the importance of holding space for a nourishing winter, for our employees and our ecosystems to be able to flourish and bloom. We are cyclical beings on a cyclical planet, and we need those polarities for us to thrive. We need the yin and the yang to be implemented in everything that we do. And I do believe that that's also an offering that many people are looking for and will look for in the future. And do our offerings, do they hold space for the polarities? Are we offering nutritious soil for people to regenerate when we are inviting them into our spaces? The sixth principle is that life is a constant flow of energy and matter. For us to be able to create an output. So in life, we have constant flow of oxygen and water and biomass and minerals. And life in organizations also has a constant inflow and outflow of information, human and natural resources, psychological energy. Factor that we talk very little about, but everyone feels. Everyone can feel the energy in a meeting room, or an energy when they go into a retreat space. Everyone can feel what is the energy here, and this is not kind of quantum physics. There is something there that we need to tap into as leaders and be able to hold a space where every input and every output is something that we address, and that we also address the different flow dynamics in our systems, regardless of whether we are managing communities, or that we are aware that there's an input here in terms of products and services, and there's also an outcome and an output. And how can we be truly ecosystem facilitators? And that's what I would like to talk a bit about next, because regenerative leaders are, and they view the whole instead of the parts. So whether it's your body, it's a forest, or a city, it consists of elements that is creating the whole. And it's the same in our organizations, it's the same in our families, it's the same. The traditional approach to problem solving, when we have a disease in our bodies, or we have pests in a forest, or we have crime in the cities, is a very rigid, mechanistic approach to problem solving. So we inject medicine or fertilizer, or we lock people up. Western medicine in any way, it has saved many lives, but I welcome in a more holistic approach. And the same with fertilizers. The massive use of fertilizers in our agriculture has meant that our soil is depleted from critical nutrients, that soil is degrading and eroding our landscapes, creating we need a regenerative approach to problem solving, where we look at the whole and where we come up with solutions that have this regenerative capacity and ability to regenerate, revitalize, and heal the whole system. So we need to look at the whole, and we can't avoid making, because that's where our lens is going to. We need to practice having a whole system lens, and we need to start mapping our entire ecosystem. For those of you interested in that, there's an exercise in the book that is learning you or teaching you how to be an ecosystem facilitator and how. We won't have time to go into that today, but it's really offering leaders the navigation map of, okay, where are the stagnated relationship, where there's a lot of toxicity, where are the keystone species, how can I help unleash more potent energy in the system? Address the tension points. That's really the essence of what it means to be a regenerative leader that thinks as an ecosystem facilitator, because organizations too are living systems. There's a whole there that consists of dynamic relationships and parts and feedback loops. How do we practice viewing the whole system at once instead of doing what we have been taught to do, which is look at the organization's performance in an Excel sheet, and from that point of view, then assess where we need to fix things. An ecosystem facilitator thinks as an acupuncturist. So where can I access and create more energy and vitality? And many of you have probably heard of Jaime Lerner, but if you haven't, Jaime Lerner was a fantastic Brazilian mayor who took over of the town of Curitiba. Curitiba was a very poor town. And when he took over as the mayor, he said, no, I'm not going to go by the traditional approach where I lock my doors. There was like a culture for shutting the doors and then carving up a 5-year strategy for the town. He said, I want to spend 100 days sensing into the rhythms and the sound of my city. So that's what he did. He walked the streets and he started to, every time he had been on a walk, he would go back to his office and he was kind of sensing into the keystone species, which means those really passionate people that I could empower more. Where could I set up a little bench? Where could I empower people to start a local market over the weekends? And where do I need to ensure that my people get access to neighborhood districts without access to electricity and power. So that's how he thought. And within 8 years, he had transformed Curitiba from one of the poorest cities and towns in Brazil to today one of the richest. So how can we learn from him and how we dance and sense our interventions as nodal points for ripple effects and can create more regenerative energy throughout the system? So an ecosystem facilitator asks, what is the highest potential? Moving into the future, what does it look like? What does it taste like? Who is there? Who's coming to visit us? What does it look like? And what does it take for us to get there? What is it asking of me? Because regenerative leadership is all about custodianship. It's all about being custodian of planet Earth in its essence. And how can I help unleash the potential that is needed to be unleashed for it to emerge into its highest potential? So what is the ecosystemic impacts of our industry? And transformative healing places, that should be the focus point for the traveling industry in the future. What flows in and out of our system? Are we creating more waste and more destruction through our living system? Or are we helping? Whatever comes in has to come out as well. So if we are inviting in, for example, a lot of plastic, where does that plastic go? Is there other ways for us to think? And is there a way for us to think, to see the traveling industry as custodians of pollination across the planet? Is that an approach that we could have to traveling? So where are the key nodal points and the keystone species in the industry? And how can we think both in local and in global terms? And I will get back to that in just a second, because I'm starting to as well. But just for you to have a better understanding of how could you start to apply these 7 principles, what I would advise you to do is to get your head around the Regenerative Business DNA. It's offering 17 key DNA strands that any living for them to be in full regeneration and for them to be on a path towards regeneration. It's focused on 3 main segments: living systems design, which is all about biomimicry. How can we learn from the patterns, processes, and principles of nature? Circular economy and services. Living systems culture is all about how do we create these thriving, enriching, nourishing ecosystems. And the third element is what kind of qualities and capacities do we need to nurture within ourselves and within the living system, health and thrivability. Through the DNA strand, there are 2 key dynamics, which is something that regenerative leaders have in the back of their mind all the time. It's the dynamic of leadership and the dynamic of the constant flowing dynamic is the dynamic between self-awareness and systemic awareness. So regenerative leaders are constantly having a strong understanding of themselves in the world. What kind of blind spots, trauma triggers, what kind of personality, where am I really great in terms of creating regenerative ripple effects, and where are my actions actually contributing to a degenerative pattern? And that can be the tone of voice, it can be how we send an email, it can be anything. And then there's the importance of the systemic of all of the stakeholders in our ecosystem and how we are constantly creating ripple effects across the system. Do we have that understanding? If we don't, that's what we need to start mapping right away. The other dynamic is dynamic of life. So what is the kind of, That is the dynamic between convergence and divergence. And it's probably better explained like this. So divergence is the energy of us opening up, experimenting, diversifying our inputs and seeing a lot of different stakeholders and getting new input and being excited out. It's that expansion phase that can also be a bit chaotic. If it doesn't come with the energy of convergence, where we are grounding and consolidating based on very clear values and a clear mission, we become scattered and all over the place. Energy. We don't go anywhere new. We just stick with what we know because it's more comfortable. So that is an alchemy that we need to have in mind as well. How can we have that constant alchemy of kind of expansion but contraction? And that is what is creating emergence. And how can we then as leaders train ourselves to hold a rich space for emergence? Many indigenous leaders believe that the key essence of great leadership is custodianship of the planet and the ability of whole. So how can we tap into that as we navigate? And how can you tap into that as you hopefully create a new exciting vision for the traveling industry that is geared for the 21st century, that is based on life-affirming principles and tapping into the key principles of life? So regeneration that creates positive ripple effects throughout our ecosystems. That is the question that I would like to leave you with. And I think we now have about 15 minutes for questions. So please let me know. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Hi Laura, wow, what a speech. That was incredibly powerful, incredibly enlightening, incredibly inspirational. I saw one comment just now on the chat from Gail Kenny. She said it would be interesting to see if regenerative leadership will now be a skills requirement on job specifications going forward. So I think that really sums up. I think you've really had a profound impact on the audience. So thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sophie Griffiths. I'm editor of TTG. We're the UK's leading B2B travel trade title. Just a reminder for those of you who are listening, would love to ask Laura a question. We already had lots through, which is brilliant, but please do pop them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll be monitoring both. I'm going to try and whiz through as many as we can, Laura. First up, we have a question here asking you, what are the fundamental skills for being a regenerative leader? How can we develop and help others to develop them on our teams and businesses?
I hope and think that Bible to get started, or at least a handbook. But if I was only allowed to say one thing, I would start, and we always start kind of teaching and facilitating deep listening processes. We all need listening better, not just to ourselves. And we have not been taught how to listen. We have not been taught to actually, as I said in the end, hold space. We've not been trained to hold space as leaders. So that is what we need to get our head around. And that's also what we need to cultivate the conditions for in our meetings. Mm-hmm. So are we the loudest, most extroverted people are getting airtime? Are we also tapping into the ingenuity of introverts? Are we creating space for them to feel safe? Are we able to create psychological safety in our spaces and in our communities? That is I would start, because we need that radical level to take our organization to the next level. And this is not just, I mean, going on a regenerative path is not just a new little metric system that you implement. It's quite a radical change. So it's also about holding emergence for the acceptance that things take time, but that we can all do something. But encourage everyone start with, and just to be really practical for 30 seconds, deep listening is something where you practice when you speak, you shut off this part of the body and you speak from the heart. and when you are listening, for you to feel good that you sound very clever and smart. No, you are just there with your full body, listening from the heart, taking whatever was said in, and then when it's your turn, you speak from the heart as well. It takes a lot of practice, because if you think about it, many of us are kind of going through, okay, we are not participating in a co-created dynamic in our meetings. It just becomes kind of silos that are communicating, not really to each other, but just kind of to get airtime. So yeah, that's where I would start. Sorry for the long explanation.
No, we like the long explanation. I guess it comes back to your point about listening to diverse voices, isn't it? Making sure that everybody's voice is heard, because you want to ensure you've got that diversity. And Laura, sorry, we do keep cutting out every now and then, but I did want to flag as well. Somebody asked, you were talking much earlier in the speech about a company that's sort of turning their factory back into a forest. What was the name of the company? Because it just glitched out when you said the name.
It's a carpet manufacturer that is one of the regenerative pioneers for sure. And are really leading the way in how you can redesign your approach to being the 21st century, because you have this ecosystemic creating value throughout every action of yours, while also being very profitable. They are a very profitable organization, but the ripple effects that they've been able to create that has a regenerative impact is very impressive. So if that's something that intrigued you, I would definitely factories into forest project that they will be ready with next year.
It kept cutting out there, but could I ask you afterwards just to pop in the chat the name of the companies and the project that people could look up, and then they can make sure that they get it afterwards, if that's all right, just after the speech. We have another question here. How do you begin to engage the organization leadership team to make changes with regards to diversity and inclusion? What are your top 3 to get started, especially in COVID-19?
What I would really recommend is and we need to take into account that we need to meet people where they are. Not judgment and cynicism. And how can we keep that in the back of our minds, that even though it's okay to be angry about lack of diversity in many spheres and industries, how can we create a compassionate where we believe that we are all. How can we be rigid in how we look at facts and how we look at studies that are proving the benefits of diversity? And how can we start having that discussion of what would it then look like if our organization and really transformed to a higher degree of diversity, with avoiding the route of shame and cynicism and judgment, is that it shuts people off. And it's quite a delicate topic for many leaders, because it's also pointing the fingers towards them, because it's them that the patterns of not presence of diversity, where we keep hiring people that reminds us of ourselves. And for them to be open to create new ways, it has to be a different kind of energy that we create, where it's pointing fingers, if that makes sense. There's a book called, I can share it afterwards, but it's a wonderful book of nudging strategies that is giving you a toolbox for how to change the conversation, how to create a space for these really difficult. So that's something that I would definitely recommend diving deeper into if diversity is a hot topic for you, and I hope it is.
Yeah, too right. We're very passionate at TTG about diversity, so that would be great if you could share the book afterwards. Thank you. And we have a question here from Vicky Smith. She says, Laura, you work across different sectors. Do you have a view of tourism and its opportunities for regeneration vis-a-vis other sectors? You know, what are the pros and cons? And that's a really interesting point, because do you think that the tourism travel industry can rebuild in a regenerative way? You know, now is the time to do it, like you say. Is there the appetite there, do you think?
Definitely. And I couldn't hear the first part of your question, but I think I hear so much about the tourism industry in regenerative spaces right now, and the potential of, as I also touched upon in my talk, about being regenerative space holders and viewing tourism with a completely different lens is something on a path towards, because it will change radically. And for you to have the carrying capacity to travel you through more systemic disruptions, which will come in the future, what then look like, and in what way can you see spaces for people to regenerate, for people to cross-pollinate, get new inspiration, new input. That's also why I dwelled a little bit on that energy of life, of expansion and extraction, and how can traveling be offering that kind of energy and that kind of by what it offers on the ground and through the process of traveling, if that makes sense. So how can we see traveling? I don't know if I'm on now, because now I lost Sophie.
No,
okay.
We can see you. I can hear you. I hope everyone can still see us and hear us.
And also about how can we work together instead of seeing ourselves as small little islands. How can we see ourselves as part of a greater interconnected web of life, where we can collaborate and where we experiences and where we are not competitors? The key for you to be able to have that systemic carrying capacity going forward.
Yeah. We have a question here from Carolina. She says, I believe Gen Z will be a great advocate of this subject. I totally agree. But I foresee a real challenge on working with current leaders from former generations. She says, any tips on engaging them to support and to take action?
It can be a really difficult issue, or it can be really difficult to collaborate with people that don't believe that we need to radically change, regardless of which industry you're working within. And again, it has to be a combination of compassion, but also, and how can the young industry leaders in this sector, how can they be empowered? Because they get this, and they get this quicker than many of the older leaders that I have met, especially my engagement with the World Economic 55 segments you meet there. And for them, I mean, talking about regenerative business, regenerative tourism, regenerative leadership, it basically between the lines says that everything you've done so far world up pretty much, and we need to radically change our ways. And you been developed for centuries, and that's a lot to take in. That's a lot to accept. And we have to be compassionate towards that takes a lot for an individual. So instead of, again, shaming and judging, create a space where it becomes there is elements from elders that we can tap into, and they can be invited along the process. But especially for the traveling and tourism industry, this pandemic has really revealed the inbuilt fragility. And I think everyone agrees with that, right? Yeah. At Northern Star, how do we create systems with inbuilt resiliency? Because that's the essence of your task right now.
We've got a question here from another Laura. She says she's writing a dissertation on opportunities for regenerative travel within the UK. She says, do you have any recommendations for formal/academic literature on the topic? And I'm sure many listening would also really value hearing your tips for reading materials as well. Sorry, I lost you there. Any recommendations for what? For formal or academic literature on the topic of regenerative travel. And I was saying, I think many of the audience will want to hear your tips for reading materials. Much studies carried out yet, but on my site, Regenerators, we have a reading list for Regenerators that I would invite you to explore. I would also really invite you to explore the work of, if you haven't come across her, Michelle. At the moment, they are currently rolling out a project on New Zealand, and they are very happy to share their learnings from that process. But and many probably people in the audience here will know about that project. But that is an ecosystemic approach where they're tapping into the potential of New Zealand and how can all the different for the system to be stronger in the future. And I think that collaborative approach is a key focus area for us. How do we view this industry as a whole? Because none of us can function as an island. But also, how do we become better at tapping into potential and opportunities and local stakeholders? So centers or what do I know, but we more become that we see us as a key nodal point in the community, and how can we also collaborate to a greater extent with our community wherever that is, so we become a nodal point for that can spread rings within the community. And but back to the question, unfortunately, there hasn't been carried out a lot of academic studies yet, but this is an emerging field, so I welcome all new students in this field because that's really, really needed. But yes, there's and there's a reading list and a bib. There's a lot of reading out there, but especially regenerative tourism, I haven't come across academic studies. Just because we keep losing you every now and then, if you wouldn't mind afterwards, again, just popping in a link to your website, and then I think it was Anna Pollock you said. Yes. Popping in, yeah, her name as well, just so that everyone can see it, just so we make sure that we haven't lost you. I can see time is running out, but I did just want to address one last question. We talked about the sort of intent and appetite from the travel industry there to rebuild in a more regenerative way. Do you think that the consumer appetite is there? Do you think that, because, you know, initially, certainly at the start of the pandemic, we had a lot of talk from consumers wanting to rethink their lifestyles and talking about, I know you said the word sustainability isn't necessarily the right word, but thinking in that way. Do you get the sense that there is a real want for change amongst consumers? Indeed, there's really an appetite for people to reconnect more with nature, and there's not a lot of opportunities there to offer us different segments. It's very much the yoga community, but there's to allow people to reconnect more with their natural habitat, because we have 98% DNA in common with chimpanzees, but we are locking ourselves into concrete buildings on the artificial daylight. So how can our space regenerative healing spaces for people? And that is demographics. I'm not saying everyone will now be interested in those kind of experiences, but it's definitely a growing area of interest. People have that craving for new healing experiences where they get a chance to connect with themselves. So definitely, I see a growing trend there. Brilliant. So it makes sense morally, ethically, economically, you know, it ticks every sort of box for businesses to really start thinking differently about how they rebuild. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. I don't know if you've seen all the lovely comments that have been filling up the general chat, but I think everyone's been incredibly inspired by your speech. So a huge thank you. The connection being poor. Oh, I know. Sorry, we keep losing you, but we got the most important parts. And thank you so much. And we're going to hand back to Good luck. Thank you very much, Laura. And we're going to hand back now to Sandra Lazarus, who is going to join us again before we cut shortly for the break.